I am thrilled to announce that tonight's video has been graciously sponsored by Skillshare. This incredible platform offers a wealth of online classes taught by experts on almost everything. Now is the best time to brush up on an old skill or learn something new. With classes from kickboxing to craft, there's something for everyone. I personally have been improving my poi from Ben Drexler and highly recommend it if you want to learn flow arts. The first 1,000 of my subscribers to click the link in the description will get 30% off an annual premium membership, so you can explore your creativity. Even if you already have a free trial of Skillshare, you can still take advantage of this offer to get the full year of unlimited learning and creative exploration. So make the most of it. Link in the description. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. My youngest sister in her early 20s was in Colorado 2 years ago and went hiking with her friend. The plan was to hike up the mountain, stop midway in camp, then finish the hike the next morning. They started their hike and stopped for camp midway. She said it started dumping it with rain that night, which meant the top would be likely snowy. The next morning they continued their hike, but it started getting complicated. Her friend only wore Chaco sandals and not proper hiking boots as they did not expect snow. They stopped at a creek and were deciding if they wanted to turn back on account that they were not properly prepared when they heard a faint, "Help me." They both stood still and heard it again. They decided to follow up the creek to the woman's voice. They got to a clearing that was covered in snow and found a woman laying in it. Basic athletic clothing, leggings, lightweight pullover jacket, and athletic shoes. My sister said her legs were swollen, discolored, and had nasty cuts on them. My sister asked how long she'd been out there, and the woman said only a few hours. My sister was like, "Okay, we need to get you down the mountain." The woman was like, "No, I need to go up the mountain, that's where my car's parked." My sister was like, "No, there's no driving access at the top," which was the sign that the woman was confused. They get her down the mountain, and my sister just kept saying how confused the woman was. They get to the bottom, and they find her car. My sister couldn't get cell service to call 911 during this time, and my sister tells the woman she's going to drive her to the hospital, but the woman is standing strong that she would just like to go back to her bed and breakfast. My sister takes her there while driving this woman's car. Once the woman is at the bed and breakfast, she thanks them and goes in. My sister spoke to the owners and was like, "You have to call a medic. She's severely confused and not acting normal." They call a medic, which transports her to a hospital. Turns out this woman was from Chicago, had low blood pressure, and it was her first time ever hiking a mountain. She was also alone. She had passed out during her hike, then it dumped snow on her. She was hypothermic, and only thought she'd been out for a few hours. She was out overnight in the dark, cold, and alone. I can't imagine the terror she must have felt. Anyway, my sister went and saw her at the hospital, and the woman thanked her for saving her life. They still lightly keep in touch. This is my dad's story. My dad was always a pretty interesting person and has had a lot of paranormal things happen in his life. Here is my favorite story when from he was a kid. My dad grew up in the era of the late 60s. He was raised in a pretty rural part of Texas, about a 2 to 3 hour drive north of Houston. My grandpa was a big fan of hunting, and so was my dad. One day when he was about 12, he woke up before dawn to get ready to do some hunting with his brother, who was about a year younger than him. My dad goes to wake up my uncle, but he didn't budge, so my dad said screw it, he'd go alone. He leaves the house and ventures into the woods with a flashlight, his rifle, and some trail mix. He walked for a while, enough to where the sun was coming up and no longer needed the flashlight. After about half an hour of walking, he felt a sudden chill, like something was watching him. He gripped his gun and looked over. When he found nothing, he kept walking. Suddenly he heard a twig snap. Now here is where it starts to get creepy. My dad was standing still, waiting and listening. Then it started. He could hear someone laughing. It sounded far away, but the laugh chilled him to the bone. Thinking it was his brother, he called out to him, told him to stop messing around before he shoots. Yet there was no response, only laughter. So my dad got scared and began walking back towards the house. Now he was quite a distance, at least an hour's worth of walking away. As he walked, he could hear the laughter. It sounded much closer. He started to jog, but it seemed the faster he moved, the closer the laugh got. He got angry and started yelling for whoever was following and laughing to stop, and that he was armed. The laughter escalated and became unsettling and was coming from all around him. Then, abruptly stopped, and a deep voice said, "I'm gonna get you." This scared the hell out of my dad, and he took off running, dropping his snack and flashlight. The hysterical laughter got aggressive and started back again so loud my dad dropped to his knees and covered his ears. He felt all this pressure around him and felt like the world was getting darker, like it was taking control. He summoned all his courage, pulled the trigger up to his rifle, and a single gunshot silenced the laughter. Whatever was chasing him was gone. He quickly gathered his stuff together and bolted, and did not stop running until he reached the porch of my grandparents' house. He told his dad what happened, and my grandpa told him to never go into the woods alone, that the woods hold more secrets than we know. My dad continued to go into the woods to hunt, but never alone. Even when he was an old man, he would go hunting in those same woods, but not without company. When I was a preteen, I went on a bit of a solo hike up the tallest mountain around. This was Central Texas, though, so you can substitute tall hill for mountain to be more accurate. Anyway, I walked and cut through pastures and climbed fences until I climbed out to the top. It was the first time I had done it solo, and it was a lot of zigzag in my route. I sat there enjoying the view for a bit before deciding to come down. Unfortunately, I got turned around and basically came down the wrong side. When I figured out where I was probably 3 or 5 miles from my house if I went straight through the woods, and probably 7 by road. And it was starting to get dark. So I began walking down this dirt road. It was a long way, but I was not too worried as I knew where I was. And all it would take me now was time and effort. I could do that. As I walked, I passed by a cemetery. It was getting quite dark by this point, and I was startled by a truck coming up behind me. It had 2 guys in the trunk who just looked like regular country boys, nothing sinister or special. They pulled up beside me and rolled down their window. "Hey, little girlie, you alright? Need a ride?" I measured all this in my mind real quick and decided I would rather stick with what I knew than get into a truck with strangers, even well-meaning ones. I shook my head at them and kept on walking, approaching a corner of the cemetery and a curve in the road. The truck stayed there, shining its lights on me as I trudged to the corner. The corner was pretty open, with a small scattering of trees clustered, but with no real cover or concealment if I did decide I needed to run or hide. On top of that, the cemetery had a high chain-link fence that I doubted my ability to clamber over easily could muster. I started around the corner, and as I did I heard the truck get back into gear and start coming towards me again. Suddenly, fear took over and I bolted to the side of the road as soon as I saw the headlights were coming on me, intending to get behind the trees and let them pass. Instead, I tripped and fell flat into a long rut in the ditch. I immediately stayed still and heard the truck arrive parallel to me on the road and stop again. A spotlight clicked on and immediately among the trees in the ditch. The rut was deep enough and the grass was high enough that I was perfectly hidden from their view. I watched the spotlight slowly pan up across the cemetery, and then I heard one of them say, "Screw this," and with a spray of dirt they disappeared into the dirt. I climbed out and hiked the rest of the way home no problem. And somewhere, to someone, I am a ghost story. I was hiking deep in a valley on the island of Hawaii. I hit the trail that morning and had gone non-stop for about 7 to 8 hours, stopping only for minor breaks to check my trusty compass. Yes, I still use a compass for hiking. Drinking water or to pick up any trash I find, as my mum had taught me to do so when I was a kid. I'm rounding the clearing of one of the larger and lesser-known waterfalls when I hear a shrill mixture of laughter and trashy rap music coming from a cheap speaker. A group of 5 young adults had taken up residence around the falls and were having a little soiree, which is completely fine, except as I get closer I realize that their camping site is littered with disposable red drinking cups and beer bottles. I pop open the bag I used to haul all the trash I've been finding, and sure enough, most of it is red plastic cups and beer bottles, the same brand they have. I'm 31 and have no problem with youngsters being youngsters, but I can't stand it when people litter back home, especially in the beautiful forest. They hadn't seen me yet, and I didn't want to startle them, so I announced my presence by stepping as loudly as I could. The group eventually turns to silently acknowledge me, and one of them turns down the speaker. I politely introduce myself and make sure they understand I'm not any type of government employee or anything, just a friendly local who loves his home. I showed them my collection of debris that seemed to match theirs and asked if they knew where it came from. This is where it got dicey. 2 of the 3 guys then got pretty agitated and asked me, in what I can only assume was an attempt to impress their female companions, buck up real close to me and turn the testosterone on blast. "Yeah, it's ours. What you gonna do about it?" and all of that. Now, like I said, I'm 31 and really have no desire to needlessly scrap with the idiots in the woods over some garbage. That being said, I completely remember the years of my life where that would have been my one and only reaction to the situation. I remain calm and civil and try my best to sequester the coming violence by offering to take the rest of the trash they have, just so they wouldn't worry about hauling it back down to the start of the trail. All I ask in return was that they try to leave the place just as clean, if not cleaner, than they found it. This argument goes on for 5 to 6 minutes when one of the girls suddenly shrieks and points towards the trees behind me, claiming she just saw someone running in the distance. I've been told that I can be a pretty intimidating guy when I want to be, but I don't know if it was the liquid courage in their cups or opportunity they saw as I turned to check behind me. And one of the alpha males decides to throw his now empty cup to the back of my head. This causes me to drop my compass and knuckle up for a beating. I take a slow breath and slowly turn back to face him, but not before an audible crack punctures the air, and this guy is on his knees and clasping the back of his head, some blood pooling between his fingers. His friends are panicked and looking at the top of the waterfall where I just barely make out the shadow of a figure against the sunlight before it ducks back beyond a cliff. I'm at a loss for words when I notice what actually struck the kid's head had skidded to a stop by my feet. It was a narrow piece of lava rock that was shaped for use in native Hawaiian war sling, or ma'a. I decided to capitalize on the apparent fear in the group's panicked youth faces and cordially announce, "Maybe it's time for you guys to move on." The group scuttered around hastily, picking up their gear and being sure to grab whatever trash they had without further prompting. The group hops back on the trail just as the distant clamor of branches snapping can be heard from deeper within the valley, which sends them rocketing back through the trees. This logically should have terrified me as well, but something in my gut told me I'll be fine as long as I'm doing the right thing. I decided to err on the side of caution and follow the group down the trail, but at my own pace, all the while cringing under the feeling that I was being watched the entire time. I heard the occasional twig snap near my peripherals, but refused to take my eyes off the way back. I eventually just get back to my truck just before dusk, when I stopped to realize I left my damn compass on the ground at the falls. as my back's facing the entrance of the trail and I'm patting down my cargo pockets in hopes that I was wrong. My compass hits the ground between my legs from behind me and rolls a foot or two down the truck before stopping. I damn near crap myself, snatch the compass up, and yell back, "Thank you, sorry," hop in my truck, and piece the hell out of there. Who or whatever it was that followed me to the end of the trail definitely felt it was time for me to move on as well. I was once chased by a pack of wolves for a very long time. Felt like an entire day, but it was more like 2 hours at most through the Alps during and after nightfall. The terrain continually switched from steep open areas to thickly wooded hangs. Inside the forest, it was almost entirely dark. I stopped being able to see them and only heard their sounds of communication with others. Growls, which I'm sure were meant for me, whines, and huffing. The movement of their bodies behind and beside me. It was the most terrifying thing, more so than when I had been able to see them before dark. I had no weapon aside from branches, which I had to abandon occasionally to make it down the steep bits without falling to death. I injured my ankle trying to get across a stone-pocketed stream, and my backpack got stuck in some barbed wire a little later. I almost ripped the entire fence along with me. Only when I took a deep breath and collected my leftover chill, it unhooked like it was nothing. Shortly after, the noises left all of a sudden, and 5 minutes later I was standing on the nearest road and made my way to the village, heart still beating frantically, eyes still wandering left and right, ears peaked like a rabbit at dawn. Tell you what, during this entire experience, I don't think once about all the pretty little problems and dramas I had been facing at that point. I don't think I even thought at all. I acted purely on autopilot. Hell, I didn't even exist, if that makes sense. These animals taught me a whole lot of respect and presence for my surroundings and experiences in life. I spoke with wildlife personnel that day after, and was explained that the pack wasn't looking for a snack, but they were most likely trying to get me out their territory. Fair enough, wolves, I get you, and thanks for not taking a bite out of this young, full-headed lady who didn't even weigh more than 51 kilos at that point. I've traveled a lot in my short lifespan, and a shaman I got to know once gifted me a necklace holding a wolf tooth from one of the wolves he had raised. He didn't say much about it, only giving me a knowing smile. I'd been wearing it for years before my experience in the Alps, and it always kind of made me feel protected. Friends would always comment on my fingers playing with it absent-mindedly. That day in the Alps, I crouched in front of the forest a bit, back towards the trees, eyes overlooking the sunshine down in the valley before me. Mountains surrounded my view, their tips tinted in the softest shade of pink, and I felt peace and freedom from my deepest core when I found myself playing with the wolf tooth around my neck and jokingly thought to myself, I wonder why I haven't met any wolves on my travels yet. 5 seconds later, I heard a growl so deep, so close behind me, I'll never forget it. That's when I turned around and the rest of the story began. Coincidence or not, either way, one hell of an experience. Although personally, I've seen far worse from angry kangaroos and annoyed boars. But those are stories for another day. My friends and I were determined to make it to a certain spot before setting up camp, so we were out well beyond dark, which I don't recommend for anyone who isn't experienced, and even then, what we were doing was probably dumb. There are 3 of us walking up this trail, when all of a sudden the guy in front of us says, "Oh crap," and we all freeze. Ahead of us in the dark is a pair of glowing eyes, locked onto the 3 of us. The eyes lower, while staring right at us, and it looked like a cougar was getting ready to jump. We are in Eastern Oregon, and cougars are in the area. We take a few steps towards forward to see if we can get more lights on it while grabbing some bear spray. Once we get a few steps forward, we see it's just a deer, that lowered its head to eat while still staring at us. Phew! We set up our spot, camp, go summit a peak and hike back down to the car the next day. In the same exact spot that we saw the deer, we found its carcass, ripped to shreds and body. It had been maybe 12 hours since we were last there. We were still pretty sure there was a cougar watching us that night. We just couldn't see it. It still messes with me sometimes when I'm out in the country for a few days. A few of us were hiking around the Blue Nile Falls in Ethiopia. After a long day walking, we made it along the valley, hot, sweaty, and looking forward to feeling the cool air of the falls. We're hopping over rocks and making our way across the floodplain, when a shepherd starts screaming at us to stop. I jump the gap over some large rocks and look down to see a snake pit as I jump. The diameter of the moving snake is that of a car wheel. Trying to backtrack with the biggest case of Elvis legs was the hardest part. I am an avid mountain climber in the Philippines. One time my group went on a night hike to a mountain located in central Luzon. Naturally, we took the easier trail, North Peak, since we were hiking with some newbies. At around 4 a.m. we broke camp and started our descent. Almost an hour in, we noted that we kept passing the same fallen tree and the same boulder. The trail was very straightforward, and many of us had climbed the mountain before, but for some reason all of us were going in circles. One of the more superstitious hikers decided to make us all stand in a circle, utter a prayer, and leave an offering of food. Only then were we able to complete our descent. This next story happened in 2015, when I was on a day hike at a Mount GB, somewhere in the southern part of the Luzon area. This week prior to my hike, I was in the same area with a friend. Being that the trail is relatively straightforward, we decided not to hire a guide. Fast forward to the present. I decided to do a nighttime trek with 5 of my colleagues in tow. Since I was the one who knew the trail, I was the group leader. About an hour or so in, we heard something that went psst as we were hiking the trail. We looked around, thinking it might be one of the locals, as some parts of the trail led to small houses. Anyway, it soon stopped, so we forgot all about it. We soon reached a narrow part of the trail bordered by shallow cliffs on either side. Since I was in the lead, I was very focused on the trail and didn't notice that my colleagues were lagging behind until one of them opened up and said, "Hey, why don't you shine your flashlight in front of you?" I stopped walking and waited for them to catch up. When we reached the campsite, I asked my colleague why he told me to shine the flashlight in front of myself. He whispered, "Well, you were walking so fast I didn't think you saw the child standing right in front of you." That creeped me out. On another occasion, me and my 2 other friends were walking on our way home from the summit of a mountain, also in southern Luzon, when a kid came to us asking if he can guide us for 5 pesos. He was dressed in a blue checkered shirt and white pants. He was very well groomed, his clothes were wrinkle-free, and his hairs weren't even messy at all. We knew the trail by heart, so we kept on declining his offer. Eventually we agreed since we figured he would follow us anyway. When we started to walk again, he suddenly stopped following us. I called out to him, but he didn't mind me. He just stood still. I looked at my companions and they were so very scared, so I said, "Okay, stay there if you want, but you won't get your 5 pesos," and left. Now I've told this story to fellow mountaineers and they told me the kid was probably a child of one of the guides. This is a very popular urban legend surrounding a certain mountain called the Devil's Mountain. The famous legend goes there's a story of a couple who went on a hike there at midnight. They got lost when they accidentally took an unusual trail on their way to the campsite. Even if the weather is threatening because of a storm and there was zero visibility, they still continued the hike. They arrived at a point where the trail forked, and they turned left when they should have turned right. The left was a deadly trail, thus they never made it to the campsite. According to local folk, the two have only recently been found. Now this next story connects to the previous one, also taking place at said mountain. A group of hikers together with a guide went on a rarely used trail. On the way back, they passed a small village, where the elders advised them to continue the trek but leave the only girl in the group at the village. They politely declined and continued hiking. Halfway through, the guide told them that they could go as far as the first half. Being experienced hikers, they paid the guide and continued until they came to a fork in the road. As they were debating which road to take, a couple stumbled upon them and told them to take the left side. They continued following the couple even as it got dark and it started to rain. Suddenly their flashlights turned off simultaneously, but they still tried to follow the couple. When the rain stopped and their flashlights came back on, the couple were gone, and one of the group members slipped and almost fell to their death from a ravine. My first overnight backpacking trip with a friend. We're both female. I parked my car at a trailhead, loaded my gear into my friend's van, and we headed to another trailhead to sort out our stuff, sleep in the van, and get an early start for the next morning. This trailhead is very popular, just off a main highway. The plan was to then backpack through a pass and back to my car. It started to get dark, and we have everything pulled out, and the last people are coming down to their cars. It's dark now, and there were a few cars left in the lot. Then I notice 2 older men hanging around. They did not look like hikers, and were not acting like hikers. They would talk to each other, but at an oddly far distance from one another, and were facing us, not each other. Every time I looked in their direction, they were standing in a different spot watching us. I instantly felt danger, like electricity buzzing on my skin. My friend was oblivious, rationing food or something. Next thing, they started talking to her, asking her strange questions and making comments about a big party, and wondering if the trailhead gets chained at a certain time. I don't know why I'm even saying this. It sounds innocuous, but the dudes were creepy and fanned out in a strange way. I felt hunted. My friend, without saying a word, started throwing our gear back in the van, and we hauled ass, messing up our packing. I held my knife and tried to shine my headlamp on it in their direction as much as possible, truly ready for fight or flight. Dude stood there and didn't back away. We drove off before I even had a chance to close my door. I've never been so angry. It sucks to live in a world in which you must fear for your own safety like that. I was hiking late at night at a trail when we kept hearing faint footsteps behind us. My friend can be a little paranoid and kept saying, "Dude, there's someone following us." I didn't believe him. Eventually, we were standing next to some brush, and behind it we hear human footsteps. If you've ever been in a situation like this, you know for a fact that it's not an animal. You can hear the 2 legs rhythmically walking, plus an animal most likely, at the presence of humans, would either stand completely still or just run away. This sounds straight up like a man walking towards us from the woods. Say what you want, but we knew what it was. We turned around and booked it as fast as we could until we were on the road. On the way back, to make things more adrenaline rushed, we heard more footsteps in the woods behind us. I thought we were literally about to have to fight off a homeless dude in the woods, but I turned around and shined my flashlight to where I heard the sound to see 4 pairs of glowing eyes staring at us. There were coyotes. We could hear even more in front and some circling around us. From the sounds of them walking and the eyes, I could see we think there were at least 7 or 8 of them. I had never been in a situation with wildlife like that before, but it seemed like they were stalking us. My friend was a hunter, and I asked him if he confirmed, and he said they definitely were. We did the whole assert your dominance and stay aggressive while maintaining eye contact thing, and just walked away. They followed us for a bit and eventually got lost. As soon as we knew we were in the clear, we ran all the way to the campsite. I was 15 at the time, so we immediately woke up my mum and told her. It was scary as hell to think that all it would have taken was one of those coyotes to pounce and the rest would have probably followed. Also, it was the one walk in the entire day when I didn't bring my knife. Although it was scary, we had a cool story to tell everyone when we got back. Hey guys, there was a dude following us in the woods in the middle of the night, and then we got stalked by coyotes. My roommate and I lived in the woods during quarantine. We spent the days there, storm or shine, drinking beers, picking up trash, swimming and just goofing around. We also started doing something that sounds odd to say out loud, but at the time kept us sane. We'd get in the woods, strip off to our socks and shoes, hike in silence to this little lagoon where we'd lay out. It was insanely meditative, and I absolutely loved just barefoot wandering. It felt so satisfying in this primal sort of way. Anyway, the more we roamed like that, the more in tune we got with the woods around us, without the chatter between us and the careless stomping of booted feet. We'd become part of the woods in this weird way. Probably helped that I was stoned out of my mind half the time. We'd surprise people pretty often without meaning to, passing within a few feet before they noticed us. It was like our guts started calling the shots. We could feel storms brewing. All the creatures seemed to stop minding us when we walked like that, so whenever the woods went silent we knew something was coming. It was one of those days, with thick skies and electricity in the air. It'd been stormy for a few days and the woods were pretty empty. We'd only seen maybe 2 other souls all day. Darkness had really started to creep in, although not taking control quite yet, but quicker than usual. We were heading out of the woods barefoot and knocking back the dregs of some warm crap beer, chatting about nothing. I remember we were coming up this hill when all of a sudden it was like I'd swallowed a snowball. I look up at her and she was frozen mid-laugh. Something was wrong. The woods were off. We were surrounded by murky shadows and dead silence. Heavy silence. Tense silence. Then we heard it. It was this metallic sort of sound, a kind of clanging we couldn't really make out. Metal striking stone. Over and over. A bit further down the trail, squarely in between us and the way out. We stood like statues tucked behind some trees just listening. A shovel. Someone was digging. We crept closer. I remember how the sound made my palms itch. My friend's face was flushed, rose red. I told myself I was being stupid. In fact, I had a backpack, a little spade we used to plant flowers and dig up rocks and such within it. Who was I to judge this person? But then again, that was a little garden spade. And as we got closer, it became clear that this person had a full-on shovel and was digging in the middle of the trail. I kept trying to explain it to myself. This person was just digging. Sure, it was dusk and a lightning storm was hastening our way, but we all cope with quarantine differently. And sure, it's odd to carry a big shovel this deep into the woods, but maybe they're burying a beloved pet. And sure, it makes no sense they'd bury their pet in the middle of the trail, but maybe they're digging a bike jump. And yeah, they don't have a bike, but on and on like that, my mind churning out reasons, and still, the knots in my gut wouldn't loosen. We were almost on him now. I think it was a him. Though they were wearing a scarf, hat, and heavy clothes, all black. A bit odd for summer. But again, he might be mourning for his sweet Fido, who loved that spot, in the middle of a narrow dirt trail. With every step, my stomach hurt more. We were both shining in sweat. The sound of metal striking earth and stone seemed deafening. It's sort of a primal fear, isn't it? Rooted deep in our guts, completely deaf to every excuse I was handing out. We were just waltzing along 1 minute, cracking jokes, slugging beers, and suddenly, it was like every neuron was firing, every muscle tight enough to snap. My mind racing. I was taking stock of everything. 2 girls, barefoot, in swimsuits and overalls, 2 empty beer cans, and a bag of found trash, and a backpack of random stuff. My friend was holding our bucket of rocks, though we picked skinny flat rocks for skipping, not for self-defense. I had a can of pepper spray buried somewhere in my bag, but much to my mother's dismay, I bet I couldn't easily access it. And that stupid spade. It feels so insane looking back. I've never been in a fight. I've never raised my voice. I spent most of my days talking to toddlers about emotional regulation, and yet, here I suddenly was, tallying up what I had on hand against a total stranger. But all these excuses I'd fashioned for him had fallen away, and only one thought stuck. Maybe this gut feeling is wrong. Maybe he's doing any of a million things. Maybe he'd feel awkward or embarrassed seeing us bolt away. What is the cost if it's right? If we walk past and he swings the shovel, then what? What would the excuse cost us? Something shifted. I don't know what. It felt like such a high voltage situation, a single spark in a gas-choked room. My friend went white, said the first words we'd exchanged the whole time, and said, "Don't look, just run." We ran, chased down into the woods and off the trail, close to the water. We could jump if he chased us. We sprinted, leaping over boulders, ducking under trees, thorns and stones sticking into our bare soles. I didn't feel them though. I didn't notice the blood on my feet till we broke out of the tree line. Later, we tried to piece it together, tried to understand what had happened. We were cucumber cool ordinary, and definitely felt a sense of invincibility sneaking around the woods. It wasn't until we were home safe, bandaging our feet, that we figured it out, as far as we ever would. The spark had been silence. He had stopped shoveling. And, safe at home, I admitted that I'd looked back, just to glance for a split second. He had stopped shoveling and started walking towards us. I live near the Canadian border in central Washington state. More bears than people in my little valley. One afternoon I was walking up the hill near my house and saw, after passing a large tree about 20 feet away, a very large cougar. My estimate for size, probably very accurate. Weight 175 to 190 pounds, length from nose to tip of tail close to 9 feet. Thick, bulky, male, muscles on the back of his neck like a large pit bull or breeding bull. Not a scar on him that I could see, no chunks of his ears from previous fights missing, hair long, perfect. You could see the muscles rippling through the hair that were 1 to 1.5 to 2 inches. He was coming down the hill and had just stepped from behind a tree of his own. We both froze in our tracks. He was staring at me like I had never been stared at in my life. Intense X-ray vision, never blinking kind of stare. It knocked the wind out of me. We stood there frozen, staring at each other intently for what seemed like 15 to 20 minutes. Neither of us moved. He was slightly higher on the hill looking down at me, maybe 1 or 2 feet taller than I was. He seemed to like that. Neither of us moved. I had a 9mm pistol in my shoulder holster, but I didn't pull it out. I could have very quickly, but probably not quick enough considering they can jump really far. It was a very intense sharpening of the senses and perception, probably the effect of adrenaline. It was like time stood still, and I could count every hair on his face. After 15 minutes or so, to my great relief, he slowly blinked once, still staring. However, the spell had been broken. He took a deep breath and slowly and smoothly turned uphill and walked away at a pretty good clip, never looking back. It's been 3 years now, and I have seen his tracks twice. One of my neighbors got a picture of him from a local trail cam, so he's still there. Sometimes I think he's around, but it's impossible to tell. But I don't know how anyone else would react to that. But for me, it was a very creepy encounter. Because at the same time I realized how lucky I was to have that encounter. I love this place because he's there, the bears too. Had some encounters with them as well, but whatever you think and whatever you've heard, the male cougars in the wilderness are the apex predators in the northern woods. I've seen a whole lot of cougars in zoos. Nothing in a zoo can even come close to this guy. He was the most perfect and terrifying specimen I've ever seen. Supremely confident and dangerous. I've had some crazy animal encounters with bears and lions. Here's a good cat story. There is a recreational area just outside of Laramie, Wyoming, called Vedowu, which is a beautiful forested area with large rocky outcrops and well known to climbers. It's one of the few places in the country where local climbers regularly bring shotguns to the crag. In 2016, at a particularly rocky outcropping known as Reynolds Hill, which is a bit deeper into the Vedowu, and a longer hike from the nearest forested road, my then girlfriend and I spent the day climbing and finishing our last route as the sun set. As we gathered our things and hit the trail in the dark, I whistled for my dog but couldn't find him. I flashed my headlamp into the trees and saw a pair of eyes reflecting back at me, about 10 meters away in the trees. At first I thought it was my dog, until I realized those eyes are way too far apart to be my 60-pound dog, and the eyes were much too far above the ground. The distance between them implied a head that was massive. Just then my dog comes out from the same trees and joins us, oblivious to the fact he was being stalked. I flipped my headlamp on to keep light shining on the cat, as cats tend to pounce when you have your back turned to them. For over a mile this thing stalked us, never getting closer than 10 meters, but it was big enough to be a damn scary hike out. 4 years later, in September 2020, my new girlfriend and I with our 2 dogs are climbing Vedowu. We meet and befriend a cool couple who have been camped out there climbing for a few months. I told them the story of being stalked coming out of Reynolds Hill, and a couple of days later all 4 of us find ourselves camping and climbing Reynolds Hill. After a late session finishing up that same route from 4 years ago, we begin hiking out in the dark. It's such a deja vu feeling that as we come down the rocks onto the trail, I stop to retell the story, explaining to them, "Hey guys, this is the exact spot where I flashed my light into the trees and saw the eyes." Literally, as I'm recreating the story, I happen to flash my light and catch a pair of eyes reflecting back at us about 15 meters out and up high on a cliff brad. They think I'm messing with them until the cat comes down and gets within 10 meters of us. We proceed to hike out in the dark, and the cat stalks us the entire way out near the trailhead. The trail winds through an aspen grove, and just before we entered it, the cat comes within 5 meters. The previous cat was much bigger, but this cat got way too close. The other guy and I were hiking backwards, eyes and lights on the cat, knife in hand, while our girlfriends were huddled close but hiking forwards. It was sketchy. Crazy how the exact same plot unfolded at the same hill after the same route. I like to imagine it was the original cat's offspring. A couple of days later, my girlfriend actually saw a lion about 30 meters away down the small valley, in a full sprint chasing prey. No one else saw nor heard it. I tend to ask all the climbers I interact with out there if they've seen any cats. Most of them haven't, but if you're keeping a watchful eye, you'll see them out there for sure. The locals know that, and they carry shotguns. This past winter, I hiked one of the high peaks in the ADKs with a buddy of mine and camped out overnight. Everything was fine the entire first day we were there, had a great night's sleep and woke up early to hike back to the parking area. On my way back down the trail, my friend and I noticed that someone had been hiking as well. About a mile after walking, I stopped and saw that my full name, first and last, were drawn in the snow on the side of the footpath. I didn't do it, neither did my friend. It was snowing a bit throughout the night, and it looked as if it had been drawn the day before. The snow would have covered it up. We got a bit freaked out and decided to hustle back to our car so that we can get the hell out of there. We finally get back to the parking area, and I go to sign myself out of the registry book. When I turn the page to where I signed in, I see someone had scribbled out all of my information to where you couldn't read it anymore. No one else had signed in the book beside myself for 3 days. I will not be going back there. I was bushwalking in New South Wales, Australia. Me and my friend come across this weird platform-looking thing made out of rocks. Later that year, the cops arrest some bloke on suspicion of the murders of a series of backpackers who had gone missing over the course of a few years. And at the sites of several of the murders slightly off in the bush were these altars. Current Affairs shows footage of one. The trail and run up to it were all over the news. And yeah, it's the one we found. The altars were typically no more than 300 yards from the victim's shallow graves. The guy who was arrested and subsequently convicted for the murders is Ivan Milat, Australia's worst serial killer. The cops are pretty sure that at least one other person was involved in the murders than the one now in jail for the crime, but they just can't prove it. I was about 17. And my friend came round to tutor me in calculus at 10 p.m. at night. I let my friend drive my car to his house. He lived out in the outskirts of town where there's nothing but orchards of almonds. Passed by cattle ranches with lots of lights, silence in the car. I'm on shotgun. I see a bull running on 2 legs like a human. The bull turns and heads towards us, eyes glowing red. It looks like it's ready to spin around, but then evaporates. I look towards my friend and ask if he saw that. My friend replies, "Did it look like a bull running on 2 legs with glowing red eyes and vanished? Yeah, I saw that." That was about 10 years ago. My co-worker came in the next day off work just to tell his friend the exact same story, 6 years after my incident. My ex was also in the car but didn't see anything and was on her cell phone. I wonder what it was. People have commented Wendigo or Skinwalker. What do you guys think? As a kid, my mum was married to a crazy ex-Marine who insisted we live off the grid, so he built this barn. He got the barn lumber from a farmer who wanted his torn down, and he built it quite a ways from the gravel road. The only way in and out was hiking, and as a kid, walking alone through the timber from where we parked the cars into the barn was kind of terrifying. But the weirdest thing I saw was a near silent, flying object going really low to the ground. All I could think about was what the hell was that, and until recently forgot about it. Aliens, perhaps? I have a second story though. As an adult, I went hiking with my boyfriend on a friend's land that bordered a nature reserve. It was around 2 a.m., and I awoke hearing stomping footsteps outside the tent. I grab my machete and listen. I'm half naked and shaking either from cold or nerves, and the next thing I hear is like a raptor sound from Jurassic Park, when the raptors are communicating. Granted, this is in Iowa. We don't have a large amount of dangerous animals. The stray black bear that usually happens in northern Iowa, maybe a cougar or so, but those are rare. I'm panicking, as I've never heard this kind of noise before, and I've grown up in the woods. Eventually, the stomping steps trail away, and we don't hear anything for the rest of the night. I told my friends about it, and he's like, "I'm pretty sure it was a deer." I'm like, "Well, I've never heard a deer make that noise before." He says that we pissed off the deer because we were in its territory, and then proceeded to play a video of the same sound, and I'm like, holy hell, that came from a deer? And I felt like a real idiot. I was out solo hiking in Italy in 2016. It was memorable for 2 reasons. The first instance was a strange one. I was on a trail to Monte Forato, a natural stone arch that overlooks the coastline, giving stunning views to the sea and northern part of the Apuan Alps through it. Anyway, halfway up the trail, I met a couple descending. I presume to be husband and wife. They were in their 50s, and as we get closer to each other, I think the male of the couple is looking a bit upset or flustered. I try not to dwell too much on it, but as our paths crossed, this guy stops in front of me and puts his right hand on my shoulder. I see he was physically shaking, pale, and looked really upset. I did not take his approach to be a threat in any way, but I was just a little put off. I don't know enough Italian to communicate appropriately anything for this situation, so I just blurred out, "You okay, mate?" in Italian, and he replied to some mumbling I didn't really understand. But what it meant I do not know. His wife then put her arm around him and said in broken English something to the effect of, "It's okay, you look like someone he once knew." And with that she pulled her husband away, and they walked down the mountainside. It was like the guy had just seen a ghost. Obviously I have no idea who I reminded him of. I just hope he wasn't too upset from it. I have a second story, and I think I know how the legend of the faun, the half-man, half-goat, came to be. This time I was lost. I was no longer on a designated trail, but knew from my map that if I followed this stream downhill, I'd come across a road a few miles down and would be back on track. Well, almost. This stream turned into a steep rock ravine, which then sunk into a sinkhole, which was a bit big to get around. So I back up and went to the high ground to find a better route down. I was doing this when I came to the top of a small ridge with a derelict shepherd's hut. The roof of red tiles had long since collapsed, but the walls were still standing with a single broken window doorway. It was broken, still needing to be worked out a better route. So I threw my backpack on the ground, pulled out my map against the wall of the hut. 10 minutes must have passed when I suddenly heard something walking over the broken tiles inside the hut. Startled, I jumped up and stood away from the building. I heard the breaking of tiles underfoot again, but there was a lightness to the sound that told me it possibly was not human feet making the sound. With this thought, I gingerly approached the broken window to peer through. To my surprise, it was a mountain goat. I let out a laugh, and with that the goat scarpered away out the back of the hut. Intrigued, I went back to see where it headed. This goat was super fast. When I got round the back, there was this super steep V-shaped valley. It was gone, or so I thought. That is when I thought I saw a very muscular man with horns sprinting up the side of the valley. It took my brain more than a moment to work out that the steep incline gave the perspective of the goat running up right in bipedal fashion. If I hadn't have had the privilege of seeing this mountain goat moments before in the hut, I would have been convinced I'd have just seen a goat man from ancient mythology running up the incline. I was hiking with my boyfriend and his cousin during the day near a quad trail, fairly high up in a mountain. My boyfriend and his cousin decided to take a dip in a small body of water we found, and I decided to continue along on my own. We were camping/hiking on Crown Land and came out the day before the weekend started, so the area was not too busy yet. We never ran into anyone on the trail and didn't hear any OHVs. I ventured a little under a half-kilometer away from the guys by myself and came up an incline and around a corner, and the path ahead was straight, so that I could see quite a way in front of me. I saw a dark-colored animal ahead, walking on its own towards me, and for some reason my first thought was that it was a dog. But as quickly as that thought came into my head, I realized there were no people near me by the animal. It was quite small, and I immediately thought bear cub. I didn't see any other signs of a larger animal nearby, But I also didn't take a second look. I immediately turned around and have never run so fast in my life. When I caught up with the guys, they wanted me to wait out to see if a hiker came down the mountain, but no one did. Now, I could have been completely wrong, and maybe a hiker had their small dark-colored dog off the leash on the trails, but I wasn't going to wait around to find out. I lived in the middle of nowhere in my youth. When I was old enough to start hunting, on my first time out, I was wandering and tracking deer, and was not paying attention to where I was going. After it was getting towards noon and my sealed food supply was running out, I decided to go back. As I looked around, I noticed I had no idea where I was. Being young and lost and very scared, where I lived there were black bears, moose, elk and coyotes, so it was possibly deadly out here. Luckily, it was too cold that time of year for rattlesnakes, and this was before cell phones, though they don't work well in my area anyway. I kept my panic as best I could, and just walked backwards. I came home, near nighttime, like 10 hours on this hike. I had all sorts of fear on the way back, of being lost forever to the forest. Hey guys, it's Mort here and thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed tonight's video. If you did, don't forget to like, subscribe, press the bell icon, do all the normal good stuff, it means a lot. And thank you for reaching the end of the video. You know, if you reach the end of the video, YouTube promotes it even more. The algorithm helps me out. And, you know, this is all good, so if you usually cut it off, don't just finish the video. Put on someone else's video after, not my channel, someone else's. And then the algorithm will love me more. Now that you've known the secret, don't let me down. Alright, jokes aside, although it's true, I'd like to thank my lovely members and patrons. I've also started a Ko-fi account. Is it pronounced Ko-fi? 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 I don't know. Ko-fi. You can send me money on Ko-fi now, like one-off donations. People have been asking me to do it. I have now done it. Link is in the description too, if you want to send me money, which I'm sure all of you are just raring to do. That was a joke. Alright then guys, it's ko-fi.com/mortismedia if you want to check it out. Cool. Alright then guys, well why don't you watch another video because you're still here. So stay awesome, click one of the two links on screen, you can decide which, and I'll see you in the next one.